Welcome back to the Love Story, John F. Kennedy Jr. and Carolyn Bessette official podcast. I'm Evan Ross Katz, podcaster and pop culture provocateur, and thanks to Love Story, self-appointed 90s fashion connoisseur. Here to talk all about our favorite looks is Emmy-nominated costume designer Rudy Mance. Rudy, thank you so much for being here. This is not your first Ryan Murphy project, far from it. How did this project differ from the ones that you've done in the past?
I had started my career at Condé Nast as a fashion editor. Carolyn and JFK, they were always on the mood boards. They sort of, never left that sort of 90s minimalist aesthetic. So that I sort of had, ingrained since I was a kid. But yeah, it was challenging in the beginning.
You have your background with Condé, obviously your interest in fashion, and the fact that these characters that you are now going to be dressing have been on your mood board for, I imagine, decades. So I imagine like the entry point to this show is particularly unique for you.
Yeah. The most challenging thing I would say was, how everybody knew what she wore from 1996 when they met until, her death in 99. But before that, and that's, we were telling the story of how they met, so anything pre-1996, and we started like around 92, 93, 94. There were very, very, very few photos of her at the time. He was easier because, he's been photographed his entire life, but I'd say that was the most challenging part, who she was before she sort of, became this, Yohji Yamamoto and Prada-clad, bombshell.
And I imagine she had to be a little bit more thrifty at that time before she had the access that is afforded to the rich and famous, right? Is that true?
We talked to a lot of people that knew her and, were friends with her. And she really did live like a messy girl down in the village. And so she sort of, went from that to living in his, pristine Tribeca loft. When he met her, she wasn't wearing head-to-toe Yohji. That all came later.
What happens during that research process? Obviously, I imagine the internet can be quite helpful, but you've been doing this for a while and you've been doing it from before the internet. So I'd love to learn how the research process used to exist and how it's changed today, and then what it consisted of for this particular project.
Well, I remember even before I started doing film and TV, when I was an assistant, we would go to the Condé Nast Library when it was still at Times Square, Times Square, before they moved downtown to the World Trade Center. And so I remember in my early days when I first started as an assistant, you would go through the old back issues and you would literally do photocopies of, now everything's digital. You can, find anything online. There were a handful of Instagram accounts that publish every photo that was ever done of her. The fitting room was just papered. We look like, serial killers, just obsessed, because it was literally every single photo we could find of the two of them. It was about 2 or 3 weeks before we had to do the wedding episode. And so the wedding dress, obviously, we knew what that looked like, but there were very few photos of the rehearsal dress. I had a lot of really incredible design assistants, and one of them, through some backdoor rabbit hole through the internet, found a sketch that Narciso had done of her dress, and then another assistant found a shot of a model wearing it from the back, and so we sort of pieced it together, and then came up with the designs.
So you might have just answered my next question, because I was going to ask if there was any particular look that you felt more pressure to nail. So let me say, if not the wedding dress and the rehearsal dinner dress, was there another look that you felt a particular pressure to make sure that you got right?
Ryan wanted to match as exact as possible. And any time that there was a look or a moment that we had, that was so well documented, that was big pressure to nail it. There's the scene when they first come back from their honeymoon. They've just been married, and it's a very famous point in history when they come back, the paparazzi are stalked outside, and so they go inside. He puts on a navy blue suit and comes out, and then it's when she comes out and he sort of says, guys, she's new to this, give her time. And she's wearing head-to-toe Prada at that time. I think it was a men's black V-neck sweater and that camel pencil skirt with the brown Prada boots and the black Prada patent bag. And so that that was an important one to nail. It took a long time, and we really we got things from eBay in Japan and from Etsy and the Ukraine.
That makes me think about just sourcing in general. Is there sort of a one size fits all, or I imagine maybe each different brand or archivist has their own sort of process?
So for the tan Prada coat, for example, the coat fit her perfectly, but the sleeves, Sarah's arms were longer than the coat, and so, we talked to the collector and said, is it okay if we, tweak it and then restore it? And they were very cool and said yes. And so, if the actual coat that you see her wearing is the tan Prada coat, but we had to extend the cuff by about I'd say 4 inches. And so that meant basically performing surgery on this beautiful, piece of history that's the Prada coat. And so we had to very meticulously take off the cuff. Of course, it's been, dry cleaned 100 times at that point. So then we found fabric that looked kind of similar. And then we sent it to the dry cleaner 4 or 5 times to get the same gnat on it. And then we went in and airbrushed it so it would match exactly. And so it's sort of like a process like that. The same goes, she wore that with this beautiful Ann Demeulemeester black leather skirt. And so we found the original black leather skirt from Andy, but it was too short. So then, we sort of used that and copied it, and then you just use the belt. So it was sort of things like that. We would use as much as we could. And then, there was one Yoji Yamamoto, a 2-piece suit. If we could find it, great. If we couldn't, we just made it.
I mean, I love the level of detail you're talking about with, having the Prada coat dry cleaned 4 times to make sure that the additional fabric that you're adding on matches. Is that level of detail, is that just how you operate? And that just to me is so astounding to be thinking not only, okay, we need to do this, but we need to take it the extra mile and make sure it's literally matching exactly.
It's a bit of a perfectionist, streak, for better or worse. But yeah, it's why do it if you're not going to do it is, as precise as possible. And especially for something like this. If you're coming this far to get the actual coat, it's you can't at the last minute, the sleeve's good enough.
So I want to touch on historical accuracy versus interpretation. We talked about the fact that even in the character of Carolyn, her younger life, we get to examine that in this show. And it's something that there's not as much, there's not as many photos out there of what she looked like at that point and how she dressed. So I imagine that's an instance in which interpretation really came into play. How did you find that balance between interpreting versus this idea of wanting certain looks to be replications?
Well, we had a bit of an easy time, when it was her, for all of the scenes when she was working at the Calvin Klein offices, because then, we could just use old Calvin because it was, that was a bit safer as an idea. It was just known, everybody at Calvin Klein at that time either wore head to toe Calvin or head to toe Prada. And it was that's all you wore. Because it was they're really the ones that sort of ushered in that very minimalist, 90s look. And I think that's why it's it's so timeless, because it's so chic, but it's also so simple. It got trickier, what did she wear at home when she's talking on the phone at 3 a.m. or when she has a day off and she's just bumming around the East Village. We sort of took a few liberties, we found this incredible plunging Prada dress with a coat that she had worn to a dinner much later, but it was well, we have the piece, we're either going to never use it or we're going to choose to use it at a different time. So I think for that particular one, it was when her character and JFK go to Carolyn and Ed's house for dinner. And I was we might get killed for this, but also who's to say she didn't wear her dress 3 times?
Talk to me about dressing the background actors in a project like this, because obviously we're focusing on the characters of Carolyn and John who have a known aesthetic, but you're having to dress more than just the central characters.
Kudos to my team. I had an incredible background team led by Maria Clinton, and we pre-fit every single background character that you saw the East Village has its own look compared to Tribeca, compared to, the Upper East Side. When we were at Calvin, we had a very controlled color palette of, that sort of minimalist, like slate gray and camel and black and white. And then, like I said, when we went to the East Village, or even when we go to the Roxy, like street-looking punks, I would say, and then obviously when we went to George Magazine, that was much more sort of staid and reserved businessman attire, like Wall Street. And so it's, I had a great team, and they worked incredibly, incredibly hard to sort of give each scene and each location its own aesthetic.
Can you describe your process working with Sunita, who wrote the CBK Carolyn Bessette Kennedy A Life in Fashion? Did she come visit you on set and see the original collector items you discovered? Did she connect you to other designers you didn't have access to before?
Yeah, all of the above. She did come to set. She did look at all of the pieces. She was actually the one to connect us with Yoji Yamamoto in Paris. And yeah, she was incredible. She obviously, knew a lot and had a wealth of information because she wrote the book, but she even knew more than that wasn't included in the book. So, like there was one scene where, it was her with JFK. And I think they were at Hyannisport. They had scripted that, she was wearing a beautiful silk nightgown with a matching robe. And I was like, this doesn't feel like real or authentic to her. And so, she was incredible. She was in London, but I would text her, like, we were on WhatsApp, and she said, like, no, like her friend said she used to wear like this cotton, very basic, almost grandma looking like nightgown. And so that's what we wound up doing. So she was really, really instrumental. And, just like those subtle things that, like obviously there weren't paparazzi shots of what she wore when she was just hanging out at her house. She wore his clothes a lot of times. So like there's a couple of little Easter eggs that I put in where, like, he'd be in one episode wearing, plaid boxers, and then like an episode or two later, like I would use those same plaid boxers, but she would wear them.
Now, how collaborative was this process in terms of working with the actors?
Oh, very. I mean, God bless them. And both Sarah and Paul, and honestly, the entire cast, like Grace, Constance, everyone, like, we had so many fittings, and like, especially for Paul and for Sarah, it was like they were in every scene every day. So we would literally, like, if I got them for, 15 minutes during their lunch break, they would do a fitting. Or if like we had to do it at 5 a.m. because it worked like third scene up, they would do it. It's like they never said no. And it was as important for them for it to be right as much as it was for me. So it really was a major collaboration.
Mm. To wrap things up, I get the sense that you worked very, very hard on this show. And so I'm wondering, what are you most proud of when you look at this experience and zoom out on the whole?
I guess just that we pulled it off. And I hope that we did them justice. And it's a tricky one to tell. And I hope it was a great collaboration, and I hope that our respect for them comes through in the end product.
I think it's fair to say that you more than pulled it off, if I may.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Let's hope.
Rudy, thank you so much.
Thank you.
That's all for this time. On the next podcast, we're joined by Grace Gummer, who plays the character of Caroline Kennedy. And trust me, you're not going to want to miss that conversation. You can check it out on Hulu on Disney Plus for bundle subscribers, or wherever you get your podcasts. Terms apply. And watch new episodes of Love Story, John F. Kennedy Jr. and Carolyn Bessette on FX, Hulu, and if you're a bundle subscriber, Hulu on Disney Plus. Terms apply. So many places to fall in love with this new show. Be sure to rate, review, and follow the Love Story, John F. Kennedy Jr. and Carolyn Bessette official podcast wherever you watch or listen. I'm Evan Ross Katz, and I'll see you next time.